Aloha, beautiful beings, and welcome to the first episode of the Yoni Havana Podcast, where we explore consciousness, looking into how things work in the universe so that we can enjoy life more and become more whole. My guest today is experiential anthropologist and ancestral health advocate, Holistic Hilda. In this episode, Hilda explains how to nurture our bodies and soul by living in tune with the earth, how to make room for expansive opportunities, why vulnerability is essential for finding our tribe, and much more. Since this was my first episode, please excuse minor technical difficulties, a bit stuttering on my end as I was a bit nervous for the conversation, and I was also a bit stuffed as I was going through a sinus infection. If you find value in this conversation, please share it with someone you love. So enjoy this profound and vulnerable conversation with Holistic Hilda. Aho. Hilda, thank you for coming on to the show. It's a blessing to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm doing so well, Yoni. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I feel very blessed.
It's amazing to be in this working relationship with you and the friendship. And now we're in the midst of this podcasting coaching. And I'm super grateful for how you're guiding me and your wisdom in your presence. And I'm excited to launch this show as best as I can with your guidance. So thank you so much for that.
Oh my gosh. It is my pleasure, first of all, just to know you and Esty and your little ones. I feel like you're amazing people and so beautiful. And then what's fun about podcast coaching with you, Yoni, and then with others is simply that they are the creators. They're the ones with the energy. You are the one who has something to bring to the world. And I simply am something of a catalyst to draw it out of you and help it come out as beautifully and as impactfully as possible. So it's really fun. I'm like the coach of runners on a track team. I don't have to be out on the track running myself, although I like podcasting too. But when I'm a coach, I'm simply on the sidelines saying, go for it. You've got this. And giving tips and tricks to improve your performance, if you will. So I just think you've got a solid base already, as you and I have discussed, because of your podcasting experience, because of the ways in which you're growing. I feel like the show is going to be so powerful, and I can't wait to see it unfold.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all the support and all that. And yeah, I'd like to start the show. I love how you have a connection to God and to the creator from a very young age. And there are all kinds of things that we'll touch on as part of this. This show is about consciousness. It's about exploring what this experience is, the universe and creation. And I was curious, you told me briefly about an experience you had, a mystical experience you had, I think with a lady in Australia. And I'd like for you to share about it because you got the travel bug recently, and I know you traveled to many places and learned a lot from it. And I'd love to hear about that story to kick off this conversation.
So, for those who don't know me, I just want to give a little background first, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So, I'm the host and producer of the Wise Traditions podcast for the Weston A. Price Foundation. It's such a mouthful, right? Weston A. Price Foundation. Like what? Who? I don't know what that is. So I often have to explain to people that he was a dentist and researcher in the 1930s, traveling the world looking for the healthiest people groups and then kind of taking notes on all the stuff they were doing. So when I became involved with this group, I was like, oh, I want to travel the world. I actually want to go where Dr. Price went and kind of follow in his footsteps. So I started going to different places. I went to Peru. I went to Kenya to see who is still living according to their traditions and what can we still learn from them, because the indigenous peoples I have met are so generous with their time and their treasures and their connection with nature and consciousness and all of this. So I had great experiences, but when I got in Australia, it kind of went next level. So I have two kind of mystical experiences I want to share. The first is in Australia, they have this beautiful tradition that I think started in the past 10 years, honestly, that wherever they are, the Australians themselves take a moment before any gathering to recognize those who dwelled on that land before. Why? Australia started as a penal colony. What I mean by that is they were like, I think the UK was like, let's send all our prisoners to this island as punishment. They're going to be far from us, far from everyone. And it's almost like going to be an island of imprisoned people. And when they decided to do this, it was at the behest or under the leadership of this guy, Captain Cook, who went to the island and said, Terra nullis, meaning there's nobody here. There's nobody here. Yoni, there were people there. There were indigenous people, but he was literally counting them as no people.
Wow.
So, just like happened in the US and in other countries too, the indigenous people were kind of cast aside, put in little settlements or reservations and mistreated and unrecognized and not honored, dishonored, I would say. So, to rectify some of that, of course, some of it you can't go back, but the Australian people, by command of the government, have to say at the beginning of any gathering, in this moment, we recognize the leaders who have been here before us, those who are currently, and those who will come. It's kind of a beautiful ceremony. Some people think it's trite, but I think it's profound because at the very least, people are saying the words and it makes them think who was in this land before? And the reason they don't say the people who own this land is because the Australian indigenous people, just like the Native Americans, don't believe the land belongs to anyone. So beautiful, beautiful things, beautiful people. I was at a beautiful rainforest celebration of the Ouray plum. It's a long story. But I got to this remote place there in Australia and I got to meet an Aboriginal woman because sometimes what they do is the people running the meetings will pull in the Aboriginal people to make it even more profound of an initial ceremony for any gathering. So Auntie Sib, all this to say, was there, and I got to sit at a table with her and some other folks. And after I gave my little spiel of how I was following in the footsteps of Dr. Price and all these things, and then I sat down and Auntie Sib said to me, "You're not following in the footsteps of Dr. Price," and I kind of was wondering, like, what does she mean? How does she know? I'm confused. She said, "You are doing what your ancestors have called you to do. You are a First Nation person. Welcome home."
Wow.
My mind was blown, Yoni, because I did wonder, what is a Latina doing following in the footsteps of this Canadian dentist who came to Ohio? Like all these things. I knew his history. I knew my history, but not deeply enough. And Auntie Sib challenged me to recognize that I was being led by something greater than I could have ever imagined. So that was a mystical experience that really was transformative to me to realize, oh, yes, I know I have indigenous blood, and all of us do probably on some level, but let's tune into that. So that's why I'm grateful for this podcast because I know you're helping people understand and become more aware of who they are and where they are in time and space. So, speaking of that, I was with Suzanne Thompson in this region called Barcaldine in the Northern Territories in Australia with an Aboriginal woman, Suzanne, who was gracious enough to host me on the land that had previously been occupied by her ancestors. So,
Huh.
I could go on and on about the things I saw that normally you only see in museums, like prints on the wall, on the cave walls that the people had used urine and blood and spittle to like spray it all over their hand. And then the outline of the hand would be on this porous rock and sink in there and be there for thousands of years. Like I saw things like that,
Wow.
you know, and little emu footprints and kangaroo footprints and all the things. It was just wild. But the most wild moment happened when I was interviewing Suzanne about her life and her life's choices and her trajectory. And she said, Hilda, I wanted to be a Vidal Sassoon hairstylist. And I was like, okay, you know, that's cool. And she goes, yeah, it was cool. But my ancestors were speaking to me through dreams. And she said, I felt like they were telling me that I had another calling. And indeed, now she has custodianship over acres and acres of land that they once occupied. But the wildest thing, Yoni, was this. When she was telling me these stories, we're sitting there at a table lit by a single candle. We were, you know, far in the bush, as they say in Australia. She's telling me these stories, and the candle goes out. And we both thought, okay, you know, a moth flew into it or whatever. It got extinguished by the wind, but there was no wind. But be that as it may, after just sitting there for a little bit, the candle on its own reignited about 30 seconds to a minute later. And we were both like, oh my gosh. We both started laughing. We're like, what just happened? We couldn't be sure, but we knew this. We weren't alone. And it was a beautiful affirmation, I think, especially for Suzanne, that it was important for her to tell her story and to be following the leading that her dreams and visions had given to her.
Wow. Oh my God. I have goosebumps from the story. That
I
is
did too.
amazing.
We
Wow.
both did. We were like, what just happened? This is beyond both of us. And that's why it's mystical, as you said. It's also, I would say, supernatural. It's beyond what the initial senses could take in, what was happening in the moment.
Wow. Amazing. That does remind me of a supernatural experience I had in Peru with a similar um, type of knowing and feeling of another something or someone in the presence of me. Also, kind of just like blowing into my ears and my face. I couldn't really see what that was. And prior to that, prior to that experience, which was about 5 years ago, I was an atheist. So I came from becoming an atheist to agnostic to really spiritual. I had multiple experiences of feeling that all-encompassing greater uh, consciousness and powers that are supernatural, that I thought were all BS and fairy stories. Also, as you may know, I mentioned Dr. Joe Dispenza. His book Becoming Supernatural is actually a book my mic is sitting on right now. I love his book so much, and I'm raising my microphone on his book. So many supernatural experiences and recounts that happened since and now. As you tell me the story, it's like, yeah, like absolutely. Yeah, that's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing those stories. Church, I know you have your brotherhood or sisterhood or community that you've been involved in church for I don't even know how many years, but I remember you telling me and people in the retreats about it, and also playing music and just kind of like being in that. And I don't know if it happened only in church itself, because sometimes I know churches have that uplifting energy and more connection just by the however that happens. I don't know if entities live there or whatnot. But yeah, I'd love to hear about your connection to creation, to God, and the role the church has. Because today I want to mention the same breath, church is being overlooked as there are some. I think in every religion, I was raised Jewish. There are some limiting structures of religion, and also there are a lot of connection structures and a lot of beauty. So I'd love to hear about your experience and perspective on church.
Thank you for asking me about that. I don't think hardly anyone has ever asked. And it's interesting because, yes, so I guess I'll just say I do come from a Christian framework, but let me explain why and how. So my life started super, super fragilely. And what I mean by that is, um, I was born with a birth defect, a hole in my heart. And it was a heart murmur. The doctors labeled me a blue baby because my blood wasn't oxygenating properly. And they knew if they didn't perform open heart surgery, they were like, this kid is not going to live very long. Now, they waited until I was about 9 years old before they did the surgery. They wanted to see, is the hole going to grow? What's going to happen with this kid? And they didn't want to kind of preemptively strike, which is good, but it made me a little nervous as a kid because I was like, "Oh my gosh, is my heart gonna, like, fall apart if I do something scary?" I remember going to amusement parks, and there'd always be a sign, like, "If you're pregnant or have a heart condition, do not get on," and I would wonder, "Is that me?" Like, I was really unsure and scared. But I think because I was born with a hole in my heart, I was looking for something bigger than me. And after the open heart surgery was performed at the age of 9, I came out with this huge scar on my chest, like this, like a big T. And I thought, well, first of all, I was grateful that the surgeons were able to fix the hole. But I also thought, wow, I feel kind of marked and protected by God because some say the cross wasn't necessarily like this. It could have been like this. So I was like, oh, I feel kind of, labeled and set apart. And that's actually the meaning of the word holy. So my physical body was a reflection of my spiritual searching, I would say, and a desire to know the one, the great spirit, whatever you want to call him, who I felt like was overseeing me in the womb, because it could have been much worse, actually. I could have been born unable to see or speak or hear. The doctor said my mom contracted the German measles, and because she was low on vitamin A, it led to birth defects and so forth. But the point is, it could have been so much worse, but it was something that was repaired by age 9. And then I was given a new lease on life. And so the first thing I wanted to do was thank God, but I needed to figure out who he was. So the Bible does say, if you seek me, you will find me, if you seek me with all your heart. And I believe this is true of God in whatever region of the world you're in whatever religion you're in. I think he is bigger than we can ever imagine, and we need to simply seek and he will answer. There's another cool verse that I love because it's an acrostic. It's ask and it shall be given to you. So the letter A. S, seek and you shall find. K, Knock and the door will be open to you. It spells ask. That's Matthew 7:7. So I did this. I basically was like, okay, where's God? How can I know him? And as a young teenager, I found out about this group called Young Life that was all about really helping teens understand God through Jesus. And that's actually a really poor way to describe it because what they do is they make it so clear that he was one of the most beautiful and attractive and spiritual and kind and loving people that ever walked the face of the earth. And so they were like, if we make it boring for you to hear about God or Jesus, we're not doing our job because it is a sin to bore a kid with the gospel. That's what they said. So they would do all these fun games and then they would say, God loves you. And so basically, under their tutelage, I was like, yes, I believe in Jesus. I believe in God. And so then years later, I was so enthusiastic, I became a volunteer for Young Life. And then later, I became a worship leader. All of this to say, I totally owe my life to God, physically and spiritually. I do believe in Jesus. And I also, at the same time, am not threatened by other worldviews. And this is maybe one of the most beautiful places I feel like God has indeed led me. That I don't have to be threatened if someone's spirituality looks different than mine. That I can say, that is so great. You are seeking God. You will find him. And I don't own him because if I did, it would be an idol. God is much bigger than my mind or my spirit can even wrap its head around. So it's just so freeing, Yoni, to be able to travel the world, to see different expressions of faith, and to be able to honor those and trust that God is big enough to be found by people finding him under any other name. And so some may say that's heretical, but for me, it corresponds with the God as I understand him from the Bible, that he is loving, that he is willing to be found, and that he has set eternity in our hearts.
Wow. Oh, that's amazing. That's so beautiful. And it comes from your heart. So, it really touched my heart. It actually reminds me, I'm reading a book and I haven't even told you yet as part of our friendship and working relationship. I just started working with a spiritual teacher who's in her mid 80s. And she was born to a Jewish mom and a Christian father. And she followed Buddhism for many, many years. And she even went to visit Jesus in my homeland in Nazareth. And at the time, it didn't mean much to her. Years later, as she was working with masters, all kinds of different masters on her path to enlightenment, which she reached at around age 50 or 60, she had, prior to that experience, an experience of Jesus when her master was calling in God to ask of God something very specific. And she never even noticed anybody calling God and asking God directly. Like there's prayer and there's all kinds of calling to God and there's God consciousness, but this was, and it's similar to the story you told with the candle. All of a sudden there was a presence, and in her view, and this is in her book, that's why I'm sharing this. It's out there. She was blinded by the presence of Jesus right then and there, fully blown, and that's when she also recognized, that perhaps there's an all-encompassing God, and there are all kinds of other godlike, and we're going to go through people, but entities that walk the earth, and whether that's Jesus or Allah or Buddha, and it's absolutely, it's mind blowing, and I have a very similar, if not the same, it's hard to decipher what's, I'm not going to go into say exact because who knows, but openness to all religions and all the beauty that comes from religions, and also the caution eye of there are some things perhaps in the text, and I don't know how many times the texts have been translated and redistributed, that are not speaking to me. But I do know that there are a lot of beauty and peaceful, profound messages of wisdom and love that are shared there, that are true the core of this existence. And for that reason, and I've been working also with our mutual friend, Washela, who talks about Christ consciousness. I'm open to it. I'm like, yes, bring it in. And if there's a God that the Jewish people have grown with, bring it in. There was all kinds of gods, and whether they come from Buddhism, whoever is looking to them, if it feels right to me in my heart, and not, try not to use my mind in, it's a beautiful message. I love your openness on it, your relationship with creation. It's absolutely amazing.
It's gorgeous. And it is, as they say, it's a spiritual journey. It's not a spiritual sit. So what I mean by that is we're all going to be growing and moving and walking, right? And changing. And just like my relationship with my husband, whom I love, is different from day to day, from month to month, from year to year, my relationship with God is constantly shifting. But I will say this, I do find much life and joy and love and peace in reading the Bible and praying. And again, nothing that anyone else in the world is doing negates, rather, their spiritual journey confirms that I'm on the right path because we're looking for more light. We're looking for more love, right? And as it fills us, we'll know it, we'll experience it, and we'll share it. So I'm less and less, I think, of a I guess I will say of a judge of others' journeys and more of an observer and even of my own. So it's a healthy place to be in and it's beautiful.
Really, that's really beautiful. I talk about it a bunch on the show, and I mentioned the map of consciousness, and it's actually a higher level of consciousness there. I'll mention it briefly, but there's something called the map of consciousness by David Hawkins, in measuring like the level of fear that we experienced, all of us in the world, from the past 2, 3, with all kinds of events, and then it's a pretty low one, and we know how it feels. It feels contracted. There's a level of acceptance of, and kind of the observing one of just things are the way they are. And as you mentioned, judging, right? And I think a lot of us can be and can get into judging, but it's a shift of evolution of noticing the judgment and then being like acceptance and observe it. So yeah, it's beautiful. You mentioned briefly there, and I know, and then we talked about your travels, and you've been traveling. It seems like a good amount in the past few years, and you've had some, from what it looks like, from your stories and what I've seen on your YouTube and website, some profound experiences and perspective. And part of that evolution seems to be really informed by your travels. And I'd love to hear more about your travels. I know you've been to Mongolia, and kind of a serendipitous experience where you told me that somebody reached out to you, didn't even know who it was in the beginning. And before you know it, you're letting go of all your plans and you're changing your plan. And I'm not going to say against old odds, you cleared a bunch of things from your to do, your plan, and made room for it. And it sounded like his experience. So I'd love to hear about your travels. And if you want to start with Mongolia, that trip, however you want, tell us any stories that are.
I will. I'll start with that, but one thing that comes to my mind right now is, for example, if there's a young mom listening right now and she might see, oh my gosh, the laundry is piling up or the dishes are in the sink, or oh, I thought I'd get the car fixed today, but my kid isn't feeling well and I need to hold her or him. Like, you're doing the same thing I did to go to Mongolia. You're clearing your schedule, you're moving past the to-dos to do the most important thing, which is to be with your child. And so there's an openness that's required to step into what our calling is in life. And I think, like I said earlier, I thought I was just following in the footsteps of Dr. Price. And now I know, oh, I'm actually being called to be an experiential anthropologist, kind of Dora the Explorer 2.0, as a friend told me recently. Yes, I want to keep exploring. Why? To lift up ancient health traditions to revitalize and re-energize humanity today. I think we've lost something, Yoni. And so, yes, I have the travel bug, but it's not just for me. It's to share what I learn along the way. And I do try to make, fun little videos and sometimes even mini documentaries to capture some of what I learn. But my main hope, I think, is to help people transform their own lives and their own health by implementing some of the things. So, starting with Mongolia, the one thing I was reminded of is the gift of hospitality, because I went so far off the beaten path, you have no idea. So my friend Mary Ruddick, the Sherlock Holmes of health, was like, Hilda, yeah, she DM'd me. I was like, who is this person? I forgot that I had interviewed her. I didn't even know who it was. And she's like, come with me to Greece. I was like, okay. I sometimes take people up on things without knowing where it's going to lead. And then she's like, wait, actually, you could come with me to Mongolia and then do Turkey and Greece. And yeah, I had things on my to-do list, but I cast them all aside. I kind of wiped out my bank account, but I knew it was going to be an expansive opportunity. And I mentioned the young mom. This could be true of a young dad too somewhere, or an entrepreneur somewhere who's like, "Oh, I have to check off these things off my list." Trust me, I get it, because if we're both entrepreneurs, we know how busy we can be. But what if you set things aside to follow kind of that deep knowing or intuition that's calling you to do something else? So that's what I did. I crossed everything off my list. I jumped on several planes to get to Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia, which is in between Russia and China, by the way. And then we flew to Western Mongolia, which was another smaller propeller plane kind of flight. And then we took this like Russian van, as my friend says, and it's true. It was like a Russian beat up van that we took for hours and hours and hours to find some eagle hunters. And these people did not know us from Adam, but Mary had been in touch and found a way because she's great at identifying remote indigenous people groups. And they hosted us and they opened up their home to us. They gave us their food. What they eat in Mongolia is super keto. Actually, it's like all meat and fat and maybe dairy products from their camels or yaks. Like, but it's just super simple and but super nourishing as well. You share from a communal plate the food together, and you drink a lot of milk tea, which is like a local black tea, I think it is, with yak milk and maybe some clotted cream and yak butter. I mean, it's just crazy, amazing, different than any other place I'd been on the planet. Super sparsely populated too. So you would go for miles and miles, not see a soul, not see a road. Like this Russian van I'm describing would take us in the most sparse, arid land I'd ever seen. It felt like you were in the Sahara Desert. And I guess there is the Gobi Desert out there. And it was like that, but no roads. I didn't even know how my guide could figure out which way to go except by looking at the mountains and the sun, I guess. Like it was crazy. It was crazy, but it was beautiful. And so the hospitality was a hallmark of the people. And that's a gift that I'm going to walk away with. I actually learned even while I was there that some of the Kazakh people there in Mongolia will cook enough food for whoever comes by their home, even if they go on a journey themselves. You can stop by their gur or yurt. Yes, make yourself at home, eat their food, spend the night, and then move on. You don't even have to know them. They don't even have to be home. It's so crazy.
Wow.
But I think it's because it's such a harsh climate there. We went, it wasn't even winter, but it was snowing some of the time we were there. I mean, it was crazy. It was very, very cold. Um, they've learned to bond together. And so that's another secret. Hospitality, I do want to extend that. I also want to be a part of a community. And this is one reason you've seen me a bunch since we've met, because I find amidst people who are also growing spiritually and in awareness on all kinds of levels, like we can grow and be a group together to be even stronger together than we are apart. So I just feel like, yeah, the time in Mongolia was beautiful and it bonded me not only to the Mongolians, but to the woman, Mary, who invited me on the trip to such a degree that we're going to be going to Papua New Guinea this summer. So I'm like, oh my
Wow.
gosh, because we want to keep exploring. And so you might be like, well, hospitality and community, those aren't health traditions. I beg to differ because love is a nutrient, Yoni. Like love is actually a nutrient. We need to cultivate it in ourselves to give maybe beyond our apparent means, to stretch ourselves, and then to find the returned love will be even greater than what we've given out. I guess I think of it in something of the image of a well. That if I think, "Oh, I don't have very much water, I better just hold on to it for myself," that's kind of a selfish closed act. You can even see my hands here like this. I'm keeping it to myself. But if I share what little I have with others, almost like that stone soup story as well, it will be multiplied. And maybe this is part of the story with Jesus of the fish and the loaves. He just had a few, but he gave thanks and he shared it and it was multiplied. And so the same thing happens with love, with hospitality, with community, with context with other people. If someone's listening, and this has happened to me before, I've talked to people who are like, I'm so far away from any like minded community. Well, I would encourage you to get together with unlike minded community. Find whoever you can. You might not have your nutrition stuff in common with people, but certainly there are people near you who love to dance. And if you love to dance, meet up with them, start dancing with them. And you may find that you have more in common than you ever realized. And actually, this brings me to one more story. I did get to travel to Israel and to Bethlehem and to Palestine just a few years ago. And I met some people, Yoni. This is actually super amazing. I met parents of Palestinian young men who had been hurt by Israeli soldiers. Because, there's a big conflict, ongoing conflict there has been for some time. So there were Palestinian parents who had lost a child to the conflict. And then there were Israeli parents who had lost an Israeli soldier or child to the conflict. And they came together in a circle of grieving parents because they knew they couldn't demonize someone else or an enemy if they could look them in the eye and realize that they had a shared loss and grief and experience. And so this is why I think we make too much of like-minded community. I think we need to find community wherever it may be, and we may find it in surprising ways from people who are very different from us.
Wow. First of all, so many amazing stories and profound perspectives and realizations, and so much truth now in all these things that you've experienced and learned. It's interesting what you said, because I come from Israel, right? So the last story of people looking in each other's eyes, which we are known are the eyes are the windows to the soul. From my perspective, we're all of the same organism. So it seems like once oneself, the big self, the big oneness is looking into each other because it's all a mirror, and it forgets about that separation, especially the separation that brings like conflict between those two separate entities, so called, to be in the illusion of reality. The connection happens, and as you said, they may not have something in common before, but now they do, because everybody has something in common. You were all of the same organism. We're all walking and living and breathing and thinking from the same source, from the same well. That, as you were talking about gratitude and giving, to think that oneself will be preserving resources for oneself, right? That selfish act, rather than giving it to another, which is the other part of oneself. That's what happens. That's the most beautiful thing is, in my perspective, to think about that separated self, let's say me, having resources of water, of life force energy. And another part of me is yearning for water because they're so thirsty for life force energy. And for me to say, like, no, I need it more than you, that's another part of me. Of course, I got to give it to that part of me. And that's going to come back to me because I'm strengthening myself by giving it to that other part of me that may seem like an enemy. Watch that word is a joke. I grew up in a country where we're surrounded by enemies. That's just the situation. Yes, I mean, in the illusion, there are enemies, and they're acting like enemies, and they're playing, in my opinion, they're playing that game of an abuser, a masochist, and all that going on. And it's part of living, and it's part of the experience. And I'm sure that we can call it God for now. We can call it creation wants to experience for the sake of experience, for the sake of forgetting that it's oneness and abusing, and then finding the love again. And how nourishing that is, coming from love anyways, because it's all love. And yeah, it reminded me of the power of love giving. Why does it bring all that abundance and love to oneself? Because it reminds me again of Dr. Joe Dispenza. His books are right here, and his experiences are well embedded in me after doing his retreats. In his week-long retreat, where people really build up the energy in their heart. So they're drawing energy and they're drawing energy and they're drawing energy into their heart and really becoming as big as they can. And then sharing that energy, sometimes with their hands, because the energy comes from the hands. That's why people do Reiki and all kinds of, you'll see those mirror things in who knows, like TV shows, movies, comics, whatever. And then putting the hands and sending that energy of unconditional love to another person, especially if they don't know that person. People get pictures and send it to a stranger. A lot of times it's easier to send it to a stranger rather than somebody's father or in a complicated relationship, even a spouse, especially a lot of people for themselves, finding that self-love, feeling worthy of that self-love. So by the process of building up the energy to give that energy, to bring unconditional love, there's so much unconditional love happening on the inside, bringing so much benefit to the giver. It's absolutely amazing. It's mind-blowing, this whole process. A lot of times, yes, somebody's getting a miracle, and there are hundreds of on Dr. Joe Dispenza's YouTube of people healing from blind in a millisecond, and the same thing from terminal cancers. And I mean, these are hundreds of stories by now that have been filmed. It's probably thousands. And so the healing stories that happen to the people who just build up this energy to give. We're all in this, and it's it took me I call some substance use to get to that place. The first one that I used, which I was in this society, I was late to the game, was to use cannabis. I used it when in my mid-20s for the first time, and I had a spiritual experience. All of a sudden, I'm like, whoa! And I still think that cannabis, by the way, to the people listening, using it in a way, thinking it's similar to, I don't know, it's a light drug. It's a psychedelic drug, and especially now, I haven't Fortunately, I haven't used it recently. It's been GMO'd over and over again, and it's very out of balance in my opinion. But when I used, over a decade ago, it was a spiritual experience, and I was finally able to see way beyond myself, and it was so profound. And I talk about in this podcast. Went on to use it too much in a way of like trying to connect to that energy constantly, rather than finding this energy in that sober, connected state. We can find it anyways. But I got so it was so easy to just get into that expanded state. And you talked about expanded story. Yeah, that's an expanded state. And we can get into these expanded states just by going to another country and saying, well, these people are not even in the yurt and they left food. And I'm sure, like, if anything, they come home and they see that somebody was there. They don't even know it was the feeling of giving a meal to someone they're not knowing. It's like when people do anonymous donations. I think it's so beautiful.
And then I just want to say, too, when you're talking about expanded state, I'm thinking about parenting again, because you give over and over and over again sacrificially, changing a diaper when you just wish you could go straight to bed, or, comforting again a sick kid, or taking time to wonder with them about the water or whatever when you may be hungry yourself, but you give them the food first, right? There's this kind of, like you're saying, how can we get to that expanded state naturally? I think part of it is leaning into the challenge, but the love that's greater than our own, tapping into that. It's easy, I guess, when it's your kids, but no, it's not always easy, right? So when you have that moment to lean in, it can expand your mind and your spirit in beautiful ways. I have 4 kids; they're now young adults, but I'll never forget when they were little, and I remember thinking, "Gosh, they're never going to remember all these things I'm doing for them." I guess I still wanted credit at the time, but I was like, I'm changing their diapers, I'm bathing them, I'm feeding them, I'm loving them, I'm doing all these things. And then I realized my character is changing with every bottom wiped, with every table cleared. They are so helpless. They can do so little for themselves. And I was learning to pour in without return. So I think that was part of the transformation of me. You don't have to leave and go to another country. That is expansive, yes, but we can get expanded in our own environment. And I do want to add, because you were talking about Joe Dispenza's book, Becoming Supernatural. I've read over and over again a book that has really changed my consciousness, or my awareness of love and life and beauty. And it's this book called Awareness by Anthony DeMello. He was a Jesuit priest, maybe from the 20th century. I think he's passed by now, but he's written several books. One is called The Way to Love, one is called Awareness. And it's blown my mind because he talks a lot about letting our eyes be open to the beauty of a flower, for example, or the beauty of a sunrise, and how good that feels inside compared to somebody praising you. Someone might say, "Oh, Yoni, I really like your shirt," or "Good job on that." And you like feel puffed up for a second and then it goes away. But if you enjoy something kind of almost detachedly, you can, like, I don't know, you expand in a different way. That's all. And he talks a lot about these things. And this book has really, really changed me and reminded me that the outward approval, the affection or adoration of people, like all that stuff is very passing, very transitory. And what we want is a more lasting experience while we're in these flesh suits. We want a more lasting experience of love, a more profound feeling of joy and happiness and groundedness. And it can come about in many different ways.
It's beautiful. I want to get back to community for a second. And, it sounds like you have or had, and you tell me the church community that you've had, you have 4 kids and you have quite the family. And I've met a couple of your kids, and they're amazing human beings as is. And it seems also on that note that your relationship with your kids is so deep and open. Like, I know some parents talk about their kid's best friend. You're a parent and a friend, and you really created that like beautiful balance of nurturing and also being there to like, we can do it all together. I'm thinking all the times that and both of your daughters, you're just dancing all the time. You're doing salsa together. You're going out and it's just like, oh, we just got back from a live music, and it's like over and over again. It was just like, wow, this is amazing. And I'm interested also in hearing about what are some of the ways to cultivate community in let's say family, church, and like-minded or the unlike-minded. What can be done? We're all yearning for it. And I think especially
Yes.
today, after the separation that we've had the past few years.
This is so fascinating because I've been studying this. I'm working on a book on ancestral health for the modern world. And in ancient times and in some tribal cultures still today, there's a profound sense of belonging and of community because everyone's together, physically together, and they have purpose together, and they're hunting, and they have their rituals and their ceremonies. And so now you're exactly right, Yoni. Everyone's looking for community because we're not in the same situation. We're all in our individual spaces. We're not sharing meals together. I mean, now and then when you have people over, but it's a different thing. So we have to be intentional. We have to create it, right? So I suggested earlier finding people who, any people, and getting together with them on a regular basis. But I think another important element to community is vulnerability. And I mention this because I think sometimes people think, as parents of little kids, like we have to have it all together. We can't show them that we made a mistake. Oh no, you're not going to have that relationship that I enjoy with some of my children. That's so intimate and real. If you keep all of yourself to yourself, like you can't admit you made a mistake, or um, don't share something that you're sad about. I've grown in these things. I wasn't the queen of them before, and I'm still on a journey. But I do think vulnerability is important. To know other people, you need to let yourself be known. So it means letting your guard down and being honest and real when you do find people that you want to connect with. And let's use technology. I'm all about that. So I know there are even apparently apps for young moms to find other young moms in the area. Like, that's fantastic. We want to use technology as a tool as long as it stays in its place. Because I think one disruptor of community can be technology. I've seen too many times a parent on their phone while their kid is right by their side walking. The saddest moment I ever saw recently in the past year or two was a dad with his infant daughter at the park. And she's up looking at the sky, and she's kind of like, he had laid her on her back. And so she's looking at the sky and kind of wiggling her little arms and legs. And he was scrolling on his phone. I mean, again, I'm trying not to judge, but I also I see myself in that, right? Like, what moment am I missing because I'm looking at a device instead of the person next to me, whether they're related to me or not? Another time, I was recently on a college campus. I was a little chaplain for a time of a local college, and I was going to go see a show that one of the young people I knew was in. And I was waiting in line, and every single person in line, Johnny, excited to see the show, probably to support a friend, what have you, was on their phone. And I thought, how can we connect with each other if we're like this? We're mesmerized, we're entertained, we're engaged, we're detained, we're being held hostage in some ways by these devices. So we need to set those aside, have parameters on them. Again, you and I are talking thanks to technology. I love it as a tool. I don't want to be enslaved by it. So this is one thing that communities need. They need time together. So look for that intentional time. They need vulnerability on your part and openness to cultivate those relationships. And they need fewer distractions.
Beautiful. And yeah, I mean, what came to mind is you're saying somebody in the area. So using technology to find somebody who's in the area, perhaps there's something in common or something in common is worth mentioning, but then making plans to go on a walk together and actually following through with those plans, inviting somebody over to dinner, somebody perhaps that one would barely know, or go out for coffee or a smoothie. Um, so yeah, I mean, those ideas came to mind, and I'm saying for myself, and I've been talking about in my previous podcast about the use of technology, as exactly as you're saying. The conscious use of it is very important because it has a lot of benefits. I'm very grateful for the way we can have a conversation, record it, and share with a lot of other people, and hopefully inspire experiences that are fulfilling their hearts. At the same, this is why I got off social media. This is part of as much as awareness as I've had. I would get into spending, say, 20 minutes looking at some and sometimes, it was beneficial stuff, let's say it can be for anybody. But for
Yeah.
that moment of what I actually wanted to do with my time for that day and accomplish, and my true purpose, it wasn't serving the purpose and the time. And I think it also took away from the opportunity just to go outside and, as I said, check out, and put my feet on the ground and see, can I feel anything from what's beneath the grandiose, the network underneath me of trees and everything else. It's like not to say that both of them can't be done, but I still catch myself a lot of times going outside the ground with my phone because I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna have a phone call, and then I put it somewhere on the ground and I walk away from it. And I'm thinking sometimes like, is it getting overheated? Is a squirrel gonna take a poop on? Really, it's interesting because there's a dopamine response of the unknown. Is somebody gonna call me? Is somebody gonna send me a text? Is there some interesting information from Holistic Hilda that is gonna blow my mind on eagle hunting? Yes, those things will be there. It's a true mastery because technology is moving faster than our conscious minds and our habits can move. I mean, we talked ancestral and wise traditions, and if perhaps even if we're gonna throw some technology right now, the people in Mongolia they will probably be overwhelmed by it too. It's
Yes.
it's
And if I
mesmerizing.
can,
Yes, please.
yes, and I'd like to add a little story or two. So when I went to Peru, I had the privilege of going there with Katie Williamson. And on some of these trips, I go simply to explore, and others I go to, share some information. It's mostly saying, eat and live your traditional way. Don't eat and live the Western way. So it's really, really fun to go. So when we were in Peru, we got to go to these highlands, this mountain far from Cusco, and I think it was in the section called Aija. Anyway, we went so far up this mountain, we were literally chewing on coca leaves so we wouldn't be bothered by the altitude.
I've done the same.
But anyway, so we got there, and I felt like a visiting dignitary from another country. They literally rolled out the red carpet. They had their little band playing at this elementary school, and these kids were dancing, and all these things happened, and it was so beautiful. But this is one thing that struck me the most is the children looked so well, Yoni, because many of their parents were farmers. So they had these like beautiful ruddy cheeks, not from eczema or acne, but because they were spending time in the sun and their feet on the ground, like these natural ancestral health practices that we have to work to incorporate, some of us as adults now, but children do it very naturally, especially in these parts of Peru. So I looked at these kids and I thought, oh my gosh, they have such a treasure. And I even taught them a little song about you have a treasure. And so enjoy it. I don't even remember the whole thing. But anyway, then later I went down to the capital of Lima to speak about wise traditions again to the university students. The contrast was stark. The young people at the university looked pale, thin, hunched over, frail, and I couldn't help but wonder of the role that technology and artificial lighting had for them because these students were on their computers most of the time under fluorescent light in the library. I saw it because I spoke to them on the university campus and I thought, wow, these little kids in this little village aspire to go and get educated in the big city, but they may not realize what they may lose in the process. I hope they don't lose it. And that's why I was telling them, you have a treasure here. But it's easy to kind of grow up and get so technologically minded that we lose the connections that make us most human.
Absolutely. And that's sad. That's sad to hear because I think we can and we will develop spaces that allow for technology to access information and to create information and package it and learn it in a way that we can still get the sunlight and have our feet on the ground. I think it sounds so simple, yet it requires investment and requires change of attitude. And I think that attitude is harder to change when we're out of connection with ourselves and nature. So once we're becoming more pale, now we're low on vitamin D and hunched over and all that, now we feel more contracted, change is hard to implement because we're less open. And I mean, just even like I'm thinking posturally, somebody who's hunched over, now their heart is more closed, rather than like a flower out in the sun, just like, please bring it on. It's so interesting how a vicious cycle can start and stay. It's those breaking patterns. We talked about it and learned about that at the last retreat. We have to make those efforts. There's a book that I recently heard of called The Comfort Crisis. I think it's by a guy called Michael Easter. And this is the comfort crisis. We're getting so comfortable of being in air conditioned space and, with just looking at the rain and the cold from inside, from the windows and admiring it. And I think even if we admire it, not being stressed by the environment and is then creating a crisis. And exactly the crisis you talk about. We were partaking in you're excellent at this of choosing to go be with nature the way nature is seasonally. I remember when I got there to Wisconsin, and I've done some cold exposure before, but I got to Wisconsin, I met you and a bunch of people there, the movement routine there. And it's like, I didn't know what it was. I think it was like 10 degrees. You're out there like in shorts and t-shirt and like all smiles and such, and you're also tan. I'm like, what is going on here? It's January. I'm from, I grew up in the Middle East and on the equator. I come in with all these layers. Yes, a few days later on, I take them off. I was not in as little layering as you, but what was going on? Were you always like this, or did you have to do work to adapt to these temperatures? So we talked about the body. The body is an instrument of consciousness. We experience it through these five or six senses, or more. But what are you doing, and have you done also to be so youthful in that longevity or reverse your age? I'd love to hear about that.
Yes. Well, it's just so fascinating because I'm friends with a lot of biohackers who are like, we want to lengthen our telomeres and let's take these supplements or use this certain device. But I love that technology is kind of catching up to ancestral wisdom, that the things that our ancestors did to prolong their lives or just to live their lives their best way are good for us too. So when I was in Kenya, for example, I interviewed a warrior elder, Ole Sanku. And this is actually when I started podcasting. I got so excited. I met this man and I was like, I need to find out like how he lived as a child, what he did, what he ate, all the things. So I grabbed my phone, I clicked voice memo. I was like, I just got to record this. And through a translator, I asked him, like, what was it like when you were a kid? He said, when I was a kid, we never got sick. He said, we never got sick. He's like, if we felt a chill coming on, we would drink milk from the cow. And he demonstrated drinking directly from the udder. It was amazing, and then he said, "And now they tell me the cold is coming and your grandchildren need to wear jackets." He's like, "But we didn't have jackets." I mean, it was all kind of clicking stream of consciousness as we were talking on his part and mine, that there was something beautiful about the way they lived and something that was getting lost. And get this, Yoni, when I asked him, "What is interfering with the traditional wisdom of your people? Why are the children changing?" And he said, "Education." He didn't bat an eyelash. He was like, education. And what he meant by that was, we're sending them to modern schools where they're being indoctrinated and maybe being told traditional ways are bad, modern ways are good. In essence, I think that was what he was communicating to me. But what I observed among this Maasai tribe and what I've observed in many indigenous cultures is the people were outdoors 3/4 of the time. They weren't fighting nature. They were collaborating with it and celebrating it. And indeed, when I interviewed Thaddeus Owen, known then as the Primal Hacker for the Wise Traditions podcast, he said, "Hilda, yes, we acclimatize ourselves here. That comfort crisis is exactly right." He said, "We spend our summers cooling our homes to 70 some degrees, and in the winter we heat them to that. So when do our bodies have to work?" So he was the first one to challenge me on two fronts. He said, "Get that morning sun, get out within 30 to 45 minutes of sunrise. Let the sun hit your eyes, go to your pineal gland, inform your hormonal function, melatonin production, all the things, and watch what happens." He's like, "Just try that for 2 weeks." He's like, "I think your metabolism will increase. I think it will set your circadian rhythm. You'll sleep deeper, all these things." Indeed, everything he said came true. I never looked back, and this is a former night owl speaking. I'm Latina. So, we were used to partying till whatever, 10, eating dinner at 10, and then staying up till 10, 12, or 1. But no, instead, I started shifting as I did this little morning practice. So, getting the morning sun was one thing I started to do that, again, is an indigenous practice. And the second thing was challenging my body with the environment. So, you can't always jump in an ice hole. Not everybody wants to buy a cold plunge. I get all that. But how can we collaborate with the environment wherever we are? If it's cold, spend more time outside. A shiver walk can happen and benefit your body by lowering your skin's temperature for a time, even if you're bundled up. So we forget to talk about this, but just spending more time outside is still making your body work and giving you the benefits of lower inflammation, better circulation, lengthening the telomeres so you live longer, improved cognitive function. But I like to go extreme because I like to challenge myself. So I would go outside in the winter in shorts and a tank top. And instead of a cold plunge, I have a cold plunge, but I'm like, why not just cooperate with nature? So I do a little mix of things at times. And it's great fun. And you suddenly realize one of the most important things you build has nothing to do with physiology necessarily. It has to do with the mind and the spirit. You build resilience. I suddenly realized, oh, I thought I couldn't handle the winter because I'm Latina, also from warm climes in my DNA, right? But I can handle it. And I'm healthier because of the way I've challenged my body. I think of it too, Johnny, as strength training for the body, like in that way. Like just like you work out to failure sometimes, when you have failure with resistance training with free weights, you know it's going to make you stronger. So I stay outside just enough to challenge myself. I'm not trying to get hypothermia or frostbite, but just enough that I'm like, hey, this was hard. I'll stay out a little longer and then I'll go inside and warm up because I suddenly have this whole I can do anything kind of feeling. And I do feel biophysically younger than my chronological years, and it's really, really fun. So if the listener chooses nothing else from this conversation, I would say, expand in awareness, sit in those places where you observe and enjoy and grow in your own well of love and awareness. But number 2, I'd say get that morning sun, and number 3, get cold and then get hot too, because when you sweat, that's good for detoxing. So nature is our friend. In Latin American countries, they often call her Pachamama or Madre Naturaleza, Mother Nature. She is like someone who wants to give us the best gifts and take in exchange the heavy burdens we're carrying. And so, just one last thing I'll say about technology. One of the issues is it can emit non native electromagnetic frequencies that are damaging to our DNA on a cellular level. It causes oxidative stress, which can lead to cancer and some poor health conditions. So, what can we do? We can give those to Mother Nature. When you put your feet on the ground, we haven't spelled this out yet. So, let me just tell you, we give that positive charge that we've collected. Think of it as like a heavy burden, the more radiation, cell towers, Wi Fi, all these things kind of weighing on you. And when you get out in nature, you're giving her that. She's taking your heavy burden and in exchange, replacing that positive charge with negative ions, which can bond to any free radicals in your body, eliminating cancer, lowering inflammation, lowering stress levels, all the things. So, nature is there as a beautiful part of creation that we don't need to be apart from, we can be a part of.
Wow, that's beautiful. I also want to ponder that even without the towers and the computers and phones and such, to think that our ancestors were walking most likely barefoot or with some sort of natural materials on the ground all the time, and that's what was keeping them in balance, also in tune with the electromagnetic field of the earth. We are conductive. I think there's even if somebody's thinking like, oh, I'm an author, like I just write and I use my notebook and I'm sitting inside. I think there's something to that positive charge that is built only just by regular stress, just being a parent, being in a relationship. Think, and this is why I go to ground every day, even if I don't use much technology. I think there's something about it, about the connection to Earth, and also about balancing the ions, the neutrons, protons of all of that. So I will throw it in for somebody who's thinking like, oh, like I'm excluded. I'm not telling you go and do it. I'm telling you perhaps go try it and see if you feel better. And I also learned a good amount from our friend Thaddeus about building resilience in the body, not only with the cold, but also with the sun. And I interviewed Thaddeus to my previous podcast, The Modern Caveman, in 2019. And it's actually just about 4 years ago. And he was telling me and my co-host at the time, Matt, about the sun and like you build the callus on the sun. It's just like going to the gym. You're not gonna go and see sun for a whole week and go on the weekend and expect to be there from whatever from 11 a.m. till 3 p.m. and expect not to burn. There's a whole conversation about seed oils and all kinds of other stuff that perhaps promotes more burning. It's about building that skin callus that he was talking about with getting morning sun and the red light coming from morning sun in the sunset. And I have to say, even after our time in Florida, I haven't put on sunscreen in 4 years. My daughter is over 4. She has never put sunscreen on. I'm not intending on putting sunscreen on. My wife hasn't put sunscreen on either since. So we're saving some money. We're saving some time. And I went to the beach recently in South Carolina. So there's more reflection in the middle of the day. with my daughter. She just wanted to be in the water a bunch, and she has my wife is half Latina, so they have great skin for with the melanin. That absorbed well. I'm of Polish descent, so I'm a bit more fair skinned, but still spent a good amount of time there from like noon till 2 p.m. with my balding head, and I felt like I was burning, and I was in like reddish pinkish color in some parts of my body. Didn't even bring my red light with me on that vacation. I got home, I did some red light. I have not peeled at all. I felt my under my eyes, and it still looks a little bit like that. I got a bit burnt in those areas. So no sunglasses ever since. I'm not letting more light into my eyes, especially blue light during the day, than my eyes can absorb. I will squint when to do whatever needed natural. And I built a skin callus, and I've been seeing sun. And sometimes yes, I use the red light if I don't have perhaps the times I'm making breakfast and driving my daughter to school and doing other things, making dinner. I may not have time to be 30, 40 minutes in the sunset and sunrise. So I use a red light panel with all kinds of frequencies in there for like 20 minutes or so. I'm doing my morning routine. Perhaps I'm listening to White's traditions, so it's cool. It's really cool how,
Yes.
and also combining their technology, as you were saying, technology to live like our ancestors. With today, what I did, I have my cold plunges right next to me, and I wanted to be good spirits for and energize. I feel really amazing at the Spirit of Nature retreat, doing the cold plunge and doing the breath work and all that. And I have a lingering rib injury now for over 3 years, and my body was really in good shape there. So I got a cold plunge. But today, what I did today, I just took a cold shower. Was for whatever reason, I didn't make the time to be in the cold plunge, and already was taking a shower because it was my day to shave. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna do a cold shower. Today I even decided to just take it easy. So I slowly turned the dial rather than like, oh, like either ego, like I can do it. I'm doing cold plunges at 40 degrees. No, I just slowly turned it down, and I did it for a long time, and I got it in my head, and it felt amazing. I still feel a bit stuffed. You might hear my nose from the pollen here in Georgia that has been surrounding me, and I'm new to this environment. So I'm definitely feeling that, and that was feeling better. I feel like it's coming back a little bit now, hours later. But super cool stuff to learn how to live in tune with nature. And you talked about being a night owl. I grew up in Tel Aviv where everybody's a night owl. People take siestas in a similar fashion. My parents always,
Yeah.
especially on the weekend, take siestas. Dinner earlier than 9 p.m. It's like nobody's going to be there. And I never really enjoyed being out. I'm a morning person, and I like to be in tune with the sun and moon. I don't believe in night owls. I think it is possible to be productive in those times, especially after people are asleep. There's less energy chirping around in the world and in the local area. But I don't think it's as healthy and as connected as going with the sun and moon cycles. I think nature has a way of going. Perhaps people call it with flow or the Tao, and I think that's being in tune with that is the strongest contributor to feeling and to being in harmony.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack in what you all just said. I'm like, "Oh, should I add this? Should I add
Please
that?"
go
But
ahead.
2 things. One about the sun is that, some people may think, "Well, I'm fair-skinned, so it's fine for Yoni and Hilda to talk about that, but it's not gonna work for me." I interviewed Elizabeth Plourde on the Wise Traditions podcast, and a couple of times actually about sunscreen and how we can manage getting the sun without damaging our skin or or how can we manage being out there without, yeah, turning all pink all the time? And one thing she said is protective is actually diet. So the fact that you all don't have many seed oils in your diet actually helps you and your skin manage the sun better. So eating more animal fats. And she said antioxidants, I think, including, berries and so forth. So that's interesting to think about. So you can build your solar callus that way with diet as well. And then the other thing I wanted to mention about technology and whatnot, as you were saying earlier, it actually came about that when our cities were electrified, there never used to be artificial lampposts, and electricity in homes is more modern phenomenon in the last couple of centuries. Before that, it was gas lights and literally little lamps on the streets that were lit with gas and fire. And anyway, where I'm getting at is Arthur Furstenberg, who I interviewed on the podcast, he's the author of The Invisible Rainbow, said when electrification came into the cities, anxiety went up.
Mm.
And maybe it had two reasons for that. One could have been people were spending more time inside, and awake when they might normally have been asleep because the sun went down. There was no light except for a little lamp, oil lamp that you're using to go from one room to the next. So you purposely had to wind down. But the other might have been the electromagnetic field itself, because it's not just the radiation coming from Wi Fi, as I mentioned, in cell towers, but literally electricity also can cause anxiety. And I don't think the diagnosis of anxiety as a mental health issue was came into the fore or the psychiatry profession until electrification came. Isn't that interesting?
Very interesting. Yeah. And I have got in my home when I moved a few years ago, tested by Brian Hoyer's. If anybody heard about Brian Hoyer's, the EMF shield guy. So I had somebody come here and test for electricity and dirty electricity and even like water. I forget what it's called. Like all kinds of different stressors of the world and the modern world beyond the electromagnetic field that we're thinking about that has been so popular lately. So yeah, it's been tested for like 6 different types of, I think it was geopathic stress that I didn't even know about that apparently cats really like, but dogs and humans don't like. So like even when we sleep, like he was checking like our bedrooms, like what part of the bedroom, and it was so cool. And fortunately, I'm surrounded by trees, so I didn't have to shield any of my homes. And also, I've learned then about the Lila quantum technology that I am fanatic about, and I'm also wearing it on a necklace right now. But I have this quantum blocks that harmonize non-native EMFs everywhere, and wherever they are present, and they go into a big radius around. So a lot of times, what I've learned, we don't necessarily have to hardwire our computers and other devices. We can harmonize the energy. There's so many amazing things happening now with the conjunction of technology and this conscious awareness that is happening.
Yes. And now I feel like we're coming full circle to the first questions you were asking me about church, because someone told me once that when you pray and you put your hands together, you're kind of closing that electrical chains. We are electrical beings. And so if there's someone listening who's like, oh, that, I can't have the shielded healing guys come to my house, that's too expensive, or Lila Quantum, that sounds too woo woo. Can you put your hands together? Because there are spiritual ways to harmonize and shield yourself. I literally pray every day a bubble of love and protection around my family on near and far. Because one of my children has gotten married, and I don't get to see him as much, unfortunately, but he's starting his own family, which is lovely. So yeah, like pray, pray. Who knows what invisible forces you could be drawing in to protect. I mean, obviously, I don't mean like it's weird, invisible forces. I mean, it's good. And the act of putting your hands together is protection in and of itself.
Absolutely. And I think as the visualization of a protection, and I've heard about white light, golden light, protective bubble, however you want to do it, the intention being there. When somebody believes in it and they're fully committed, they will see results. Technologies, as our friend also, Heidi, likes to say, we don't really need anything. It does take commitment. It does take perseverance, but we have all the tools. And I like to do both. So I like to use the power of intention. I like to use the tools. And especially as thinking about hospitality and hospitality to my neighbors and neighborhood and all other beings that are around me, I'm amplifying the good vibes wherever I go and my home as much as I can. There's something that you said earlier, a bunch earlier, about being an experiential anthropologist and going to all kinds of different places. And not only, as you said, learning and teaching and all that, but also like bringing in wisdom to be shared. And what was interesting to me, I remember when you just drew a couple months ago a bee in our painting class as your spirit animal. And I was thinking about a bee because I've read also on your site that you've went to this uh, bee wellness retreat where you got to be. There was no real structure or lectures, and really enjoyed it. It was nourishing. And I know that you are very present and you're buzzing with energy like a bee. It seemed to me that part of your mission, and also by your ancestors and your calling, is to collect nectar in all kinds of different places by interviewing people on your podcast, and also traveling, and also just being you, present in so many places in where you live and everywhere else that you go, and constantly collect the nectar and then bring it home in a way that you then share the love with others. So what I'm getting at is, how did you choose to draw a bee, which seems to be so aligned with you as a spirit animal?
Well, it's funny because Zan, the artist who was drawing these things out of us at this retreat, said, "See what comes to you." And we were spending a lot of time on the rooftop, remember, kind of dancing and having our morning movement, catching the sunset and so forth and sunrise. And a bee was coming near me. So it came to me that way. But also, Johnny, honestly, I was listening. And when we did some of our mastermind time where we try to give each other insights about our businesses, the message that came through to me loud and clear from the other folks that were there was, Hilda, you need to be more. In other words, be yourself, be a human. Don't feel like you need to always be active. I sometimes do think I turn into a human doing instead of a human being because I get so
Mm,
excited and I do have so much energy. And so that was a challenge for me. But when I heard that, I thought, okay, then maybe the bee is the thing to draw. And when I looked up its symbolism, it said it was a guardian of natural beauty and a symbol of love as well. And I love what you just said about the nectar. So that does kind of encapsulate me, I think, in a good way. And sometimes if you think about bees, they hang out a little bit. They're not always moving to and fro. They'll stay on a flower for a bit. So I'm trying to cultivate some of that, just resting in who I am and trusting God for the process. I'm fascinated by what I am attracting as I'm sitting in that kind of power. Because I actually did draw. This is very vulnerable for me to share, but I will share it. I drew a little crown on the bee because I was thinking, okay, maybe I could be a queen bee. And sometimes we don't always understand our own worth and our own preciousness. And I think if I believe in God and He is the king, then His children are princes and princesses. So I have every right to wear a crown. But I think that might sound proud or haughty to some. So that's why I'm not putting it out everywhere. Obviously, I'm putting it on this podcast. But I want to encourage you as a listener to wear your crown with joy and gratitude. You don't have to be haughty to wear a crown. You can just know that you're a child of God and that you can attract beautiful things. You can rest in your purpose as a human being. It will sometimes unfold as you go along. For many years, my purpose was simply to, as I said earlier, wipe some bottoms and feed some little mouths, and that was beautiful. And now my purpose has expanded. But in every place and every space, there is something for you to do, but also to be and to receive with gratitude.
it's beautiful. And it does remind me of one more thing that I want to add that Dr. Joe Dispenza teaches. And he says, you will only get what you feel worthy of receiving. And some people have a mantra that they will say over and over again, but the feeling is not there. And based on the laws of attraction, really, when we feel something, we're grateful for it. And that's his manifestation and attraction. We will get what we feel worthy of receiving. And it's hard. A lot of times it's hard because the programming has been that feeling worthy of receiving, whatever that might be, being in a certain position to be a podcaster like you, or me in this position, or like, oh, doing whatever that might be, or abundance, or relationship, or land, or whatever that might be, or health. As I said, we're all children of creation and we're all worthy of receiving. And it takes sometimes some work to get into that feeling of receiving. So what I'm sending the message is, if you're listening to this and there's something that you want to attract, the work to be done is to feel worthy of receiving it over and over again. Not only say it in words, but really feel it. So that's my suggestion there as adding that. And yeah, I mean, it's been amazing so far, and thank you so much for your time. I'd like to close this interview with, I know you told a bunch of experiences that are mind blowing, but if there's been another experience from now or from before that blew your mind, I'd love for you to tell that story as we part ways from our listeners.
When I was in Mexico not too long ago, just last year, this is a story I have not broadcast many places. So again, Yoni, you're good at pulling out the nuggets that are very special. And I had the privilege of being part of a plant ceremony. It was peyote. And I'm a girl who's never been high from anything, any mind altering chemicals. I've never really been drunk. I've never done any of that stuff because I've always felt very high on life. And so I felt a little conflicted because here I was going to be a part of an ancient ceremony. So, on the one hand, I felt like this ancestral part of me was saying, experiment, try. This isn't going to hurt you. It's a plant medicine, right? And I literally was with some shaman and some people of Mayan ancestry, and they said we're going to honor the elements, the fire, the air, the water, and the earth, and honor the guardians of those elements. And it was all very beautiful. And we are going to stay up all night long. I didn't really know what to expect, but I knew that I wanted to participate. But it was hard for me because, again, having never done any drugs or anything, I was like, "Oh my gosh, what's gonna happen? Am I gonna have, like, diarrhea or vomiting?" They said all these things are possible, and I was like, "I don't really want that." Plus, I didn't really wanna compromise kind of my corporal integrity, if you will. So, what did I do? When they were passing out the peyote that looked like little pieces or little pods of apples, it looked, like, very innocuous, actually. Um, they were passing out multiple pieces to people. I thought, "You know what? I'm just going to" I felt like a girl at a party having just a sip of champagne. "I will just take one little bit here and see what happens." And I thought, if the Great Spirit's gonna talk to me, he does not need me to be having some kind of hallucinatory experience. He will still speak to me. And it was a beautiful evening of music, and some people were dancing, and there was, like, a lot of you were supposed to stay awake the whole night, which I did. My Oura ring showed me that I so I was very modern even though I was, like, around the fire, abuelo fuego, it was, like, all the things, it was amazing. But I'm headed is this. At one point, and I don't know what time of evening it was or the wee hours of the morning because I didn't have my watch or my phone or anything, which was great. I realized, "Oh my gosh, Hilda, you have been sitting here for hours judging yourself because you didn't take more or you didn't take less." Like, I noticed I was like, "Oh, should I be taking more?" I kept asking, myself and questioning my choices. And, well, oh no, now I'm not pure anymore because I took a bite of this plant medicine. It was like all this self-judgment. And then what did I do? This was the best decision ever. In that moment when I realized I had spent hours judging, and it was probably 2 or 3 in the morning, I was like, I'm not going to spend the rest of the night judging myself. No one here is judging me. Abuelo fuego, abuelas piedras, like nobody was judging me at all. Everyone was having their own little journey and experience. I thought this is like a prayer vigil. People are not paying attention to me. I could do anything I want here. And the truth is, they were playing music throughout the night, and some people were dancing. And I thought, oh my gosh, whenever you feel stuck, the thing to do is dance. So I started dancing. Not crazy. Maybe it was crazy. It doesn't matter. Nobody was judging me. So I was just dancing and letting loose, and it felt so good, and I felt so free. And then in the morning, we did a temazcal ceremony, which is when you get in this like ceremonial sweat lodge like the Native Americans do. And it was so hot. You felt like your ears were on fire, your hair was going to burn off. Like, it was very humbling and cathartic. And then to come out of that, we did several rounds of hot rocks and just excruciating heat. When you came out, it was, like, shaped like an igloo. You literally had to, like, crawl out, and to me, it felt like a rebirth. It felt very beautiful, like I had come through a moment where I was judging myself in that judge position that we talked about earlier today, and I realized I didn't have to judge myself. I could accept myself for where I was at, and all these things were my teachers. And so I think, going back to the young mom I was addressing earlier, if you're a young mom with a baby in your arms or you've got 3 kids around you and they're your teachers. They're your teachers. Don't shirk the moment wishing they were older, because those days will come when they will be older and they can tie their own shoes and they can do their own stuff. And you might start yearning for the old days. So instead, let your moments be your teacher. And for the entrepreneurial father or the one who's got a 9 to 5 and he's juggling a lot of things, let what you're learning just grow in awareness of what you're learning, what triggers you, what brings your inner judge out that you can release, and what can you find to be grateful for. And in those ways your heart will expand. I think that experience for me was more transformative than I could ever know.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. It's a beautiful story. And it touches my heart. I'm moved, and I'm sure A lot of people are moved right now. Whew. Wow. It's that is a rebirth. I want to say that I have noticed within myself and others that if people are listening, they're thinking, yes, I want to be rebirthed, or I have been rebirthed before. There are many opportunities to be rebirthed in another version of evolution and rebirthing. And wow, that's quite an evolution. That's quite an evolution. Wow. Where can people find more of Holistic Hilda?
Yes, like I said, I'm really committed to lifting up this ancestral wisdom to revitalize people's energy and vitality and their health. So I post YouTube videos on my Holistic Hilda channel. I'm on Instagram at Holistic Hilda. I'm on TikTok at Holistic Hilda. And of course, they can find me on my website, holistichilda.com, and the podcast, Wise Traditions.
Amazing. Right, so I'm going to put my hands together and get grounded that way and close my circuits and give you a big gratitude and thank you and a big aho that I like to say that I've learned from the people in Peru when I was doing work with them as recognition and kudos and an amen. So thank you so much, Hilda. Aho, and thank you for listening, everybody. Until next time.
Aho, Yoni, thank you.
Well, lovely beings, I hope you enjoyed and were inspired by this conversation as much as I was. You can find the full show notes and all episodes on my website at yonihavana.com/podcast. If you are a man and you are called to do transformational work to become a better man, to find and grow the divinity within you, and you are longing a community of masculine men who share a passion for growth, please check out Men of Integrity by going to moi.community. Lastly, if you are enjoying the Yoni Havana podcast, I'd be so grateful if you take a moment to leave us a rating and a review on your podcast app of choice. The Yoni Havana Podcast is a brand new show, and your support would help reach new people by rating higher on the algorithms. Also, your feedback would help me deliver the best experience to you as the show keeps evolving. Much love and a big aho. See you on the next one.